Welcome back to our channel. The world stage is constantly shifting, with numerous significant events unfolding daily. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating aspect of recent American political history. Do you believe the entire United States was united behind Donald Trump? Perhaps reconsider that notion. What if we told you that entire states exhibited what could almost be described as a political allergy to the 45th president? We're exploring places where his appearances were met with jeers, where his very name ignited demonstrations, and where symbols of his administration were metaphorically burned. Why did vast numbers of Americans harbor such intense animosity towards him? Was the core issue about race, the pursuit of power, perceived falsehoods, or something even more fundamental lurking beneath the surface? Prepare yourself, because we are about to unveil the 10 U.S. states that showed the most profound opposition to Trump, and they certainly weren't silent about it. Stay with us as we dissect the dynamics, the data, and the deep-seated reasons behind this significant political divide. We'll have comprehensive conclusions at the end of this analysis. Before we delve into the list, if you find this exploration of political dynamics insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Your support is incredibly important for helping us continue to bring you in-depth content like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our global audience. Let's begin our countdown at number 10, California. It's often called the Golden State, the place where aspirations are supposedly realized. Unless perhaps your name is Donald Trump. Picture an environment where virtually every action he took was greeted with resounding boos, widespread protests, and persistent demands for his impeachment. This wasn't just passive disagreement. It was an active, vocal rejection. California represents a state that wasn't merely opposing his policies. It felt like it was actively trying to expel his influence. California stands as a bastion of progressive thought and action. And interestingly, it also became the epicenter of some of the most vocal resistance against his leadership style and political agenda. The state's diverse population, from the tech innovators of Silicon Valley to the outspoken celebrities of Hollywood, largely found Trump's platform and rhetoric incompatible with their values. From Google and Intel to movie stars and directors, the disapproval was palpable. Trump rarely received a warm reception in the state. The divide between California's prevailing values and Trump's presidency was stark and seemingly unbridgeable. The state hasn't supported a Republican presidential candidate since 1988, a streak that solidified during the Trump years. Key policy areas created major friction. California's stance on immigration, its aggressive approach to combating climate change, and its commitment to expanding healthcare access clashed dramatically with the Trump administration's priorities. These weren't just minor disagreements. They represented fundamental differences in worldview and governance philosophy. You might be astonished by the depth of this chasm. While some might assume a state as large and diverse as California would have significant pockets of Trump support, the overall political climate remained decidedly anti-Trump. The state's leadership and a large portion of its populace seemed unified in their rejection, making it clear that his brand of politics was unwelcome. This opposition manifested not just in elections, but in legislative actions, legal challenges, and constant public discourse that questioned the legitimacy and impact of his presidency on the values Californians hold dear. The state actively sought to counteract federal policies it disagreed with, particularly on environmental regulations and immigration enforcement, positioning itself as a nationwide leader of the resistance movement. Make sure you watch this video all the way through, because the insights culminate in some important conclusions you won't want to miss. Moving on to number 9, New York. Contemplate the irony of hailing from the very state where Donald Trump constructed his entire business and media legacy, only to have your own populace consistently reject you upon entering the political arena. Imagine the state that houses Trump Tower becoming one of the most formidable obstacles to his political ambitions. New York is where the businessman cemented his fame and fortune, building skyscrapers and a global brand. Yet, the moment he stepped onto the national political stage, a significant portion of the state seemingly couldn't stand him. It transformed into a full-blown confrontation with the city and state he once epitomized. From the financial powerhouses of Manhattan to the diverse neighborhoods of Brooklyn and beyond, Trump's rhetoric found little resonance. His policy positions, particularly on issues like taxation, immigration, and urban development, often clashed with the priorities of New York's leadership and its residents. The state has been a Democratic stronghold for decades, and Trump's presidency only seemed to deepen that political alignment. Every controversial statement, every tweet, every policy decision appeared to further erode his image in his home state. The attacks on New York's sanctuary city policies, for example, were met with fierce local opposition, creating a continuous battleground. It's hardly surprising, then, that he was frequently met with boos and protests, even during events held within the state. You might think the state that launched his career would rally around him, but the reality was quite the opposite. New York remained steadfast in its rejection of his political style and substance. In fact, its voting patterns place it among the most overwhelmingly blue states in the entire nation, consistently delivering large margins for Democratic candidates and showcasing a profound disconnect with the Trump agenda. This deep-seated opposition wasn't just limited to politicians. It permeated the cultural fabric of the state, making New York a symbolic and practical center of resistance throughout his term. Number 8 is Massachusetts. What unfolds when a state, renowned for its progressive principles and immense intellectual pride, firmly rejects the individual leading the nation? Consider the birthplace of the American Revolution becoming a hotbed of opposition to a sitting president. Massachusetts has made its position exceptionally clear. Donald Trump and his political philosophy were not welcome. The state is historically a powerhouse of Democratic support, rooted in values of social progress, education, and community. You would be stunned by the intensity with which Massachusetts pushed back against his administration's policies. The state, home to prestigious institutions like Harvard and MIT, prides itself on intellectual rigor and forward-thinking ideals, which often stood in direct opposition to Trump's rhetoric and actions. His approach to science, education, and environmental protection, in particular, drew significant ire. Massachusetts residents, from the coastal cities to the inland towns, showed their disapproval emphatically at the ballot box. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden secured the state with an overwhelming 65.7% of the vote, compared to Trump's 32.5%, a staggering margin reflecting deep opposition. This wasn't just the coastal elites or university professors. Regular citizens across the state felt the disconnect. Furthermore, Massachusetts has its own history of pioneering healthcare reform, often cited as a precursor to the Affordable Care Act. Trump's repeated attempts to dismantle the ACA were seen as a direct assault on a system many in Massachusetts valued. The clash wasn't merely political, it felt personal, striking at the core of the state's identity and its commitment to progressive governance. His administration's perceived undermining of scientific expertise and environmental regulations only solidified the opposition in a state that values knowledge and conservation. The resistance was widespread and deeply felt across various demographics. At number 7, we find Vermont. How does a state that cherishes its independence and embodies liberal ideals react to a president whose style and policies seem antithetical to everything it stands for? Vermont, though small in population, has consistently been at the forefront of resistance against Donald Trump. You would be taken aback to learn that even in this largely rural state, the opposition was fierce and deeply rooted. Vermont has long prided itself on a unique brand of politics, often independent-minded and leaning strongly towards progressive values. The state is famously home to Bernie Sanders, arguably the most prominent face of the national resistance movement against Trump. Sanders' immense popularity in Vermont reflects the state's broader political leanings. His supporters, and indeed a large majority of Vermonters, have been vocal and consistent in their opposition to Trump's agenda. But the resistance goes beyond just Sanders. Vermont has consistently voted blue in presidential elections by significant margins. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state with approximately 66% of the vote. In 2016, Hillary Clinton also secured a comfortable victory here. The state's rejection of Trump seems rooted in its dedication to progressive values like social justice, universal health care, and robust environmental protection. Trump's policies on climate change, his attempts at healthcare reform, and his controversial rhetoric on immigration were met with widespread disapproval. Vermonters, despite the state's rural character often associated with conservatism elsewhere, hold strong principles that clashed directly with the Trump administration. It wasn't just about party affiliation. It was a fundamental disagreement on core values. The state had no tolerance for policies perceived as harmful to the environment or social equity. The rejection was consistent and clear through voting patterns and public sentiment, demonstrating that Trump's political brand simply did not align with the independent and progressive spirit of Vermont. Number 6 brings us to Illinois. What happens when you mix a vast, diverse population, a powerful democratic political machine, and a complete rejection of Trump's policies? You get Illinois. You might be shocked to discover just how resolutely this Midwestern state stood against him. From the bustling urban landscape of Chicago to the agricultural communities spread across the state, Trump's presidency faced constant pushback. Chicago, the state's largest city and a major Democratic stronghold, is often viewed as the very epicenter of anti-Trump sentiment in the region. Its diverse population, including large communities of blue-collar workers, college students, and professionals, saw massive opposition to Trump's stance on immigration, his handling of the economy, and his environmental policies. But the rejection wasn't confined to the cities. Even in traditionally more conservative rural areas, people began to turn away as his term progressed. Illinois is also home to some of the nation's most influential labor unions. Trump's antagonistic approach towards labor rights and his attempts to weaken union protections made Illinois voters even more furious. His promises to revitalize industries like manufacturing largely fell flat for many workers in the state, who felt betrayed. In the 2020 election, Illinois overwhelmingly supported Joe Biden, giving him a margin of victory exceeding 17%. This decisive result made it clear that Trump's policies simply did not resonate with the majority of Illinois residents. The state's political landscape, historically leaning Democratic, solidified its opposition during his presidency. It wasn't just about specific policies. There was a fundamental clash of values. The diverse population of Illinois, with significant minority and immigrant communities, reacted strongly against rhetoric perceived as divisive and harmful. The state became a symbol of resistance, reflecting a broad coalition of voters united in their disapproval of the Trump administration's direction. Landing at number 5 is Oregon. Envision a state celebrated for its stunning natural landscapes, its progressive political culture, and its deep commitment to environmental sustainability. Now, imagine a president whose policies seem to contradict every one of those core values. Welcome to Oregon, a state that you'd be shocked to learn rejected Donald Trump with remarkable consistency and intensity. Oregon, with its verdant forests, forward-thinking cities like Portland and Eugene, and strong environmental ethos, has been a vocal opponent of his administration from the very beginning. Trump's disregard for climate change science and his policies affecting public lands sparked intense resistance here. The state's growing urban population, known for being young, educated, and highly engaged, overwhelmingly supports progressive policies and found little common ground with Trump. His views on healthcare, immigration, and social justice were widely rejected. Oregon was also at the center of massive protests, particularly concerning racial justice issues. Trump's handling of these events, including the controversial deployment of federal agents to Portland in 2020, only fueled the opposition. The city's residents, along with people across the state, actively opposed what they saw as an overreach of federal power and an infringement on their right to protest. In the 2020 election, Oregon voted decisively for Joe Biden, further solidifying its stance against Trump. This wasn't just a political leaning. It felt like a cultural rebellion against everything Trump represented. The state's population, which values environmental stewardship and social equity, saw Trump's administration as a direct threat to their way of life and their vision for the future. The resistance was palpable in cities and spread into many other communities, making Oregon a consistent bastion of anti-Trump sentiment on the West Coast. Number 4 is Washington. What occurs when a state on the West Coast, known for its booming tech industry, fervent environmental activism, and progressive policies, decides it has had enough of Trump's agenda? Washington state has unequivocally shown that it does not align with Trump's policies or his leadership style. You might be shocked to discover just how profoundly the state pushed back during his presidency. From the tech hubs of Seattle to the agricultural areas east of the Cascades, Washington rejected the core tenets of Trumpism. In the 2020 election, Washington delivered a resounding 58% of its votes to Joe Biden, a clear message that Trump's divisive rhetoric and policies were unwelcome. This state is home to millions of tech workers, scientists, and environmentalists who found Trump's policies deeply troubling. His administration's rollback of environmental regulations and dismissal of climate change science hit hard in a state that prides itself on its green economy and natural beauty. Washington is also home to some of the country's largest corporations, like Amazon and Microsoft. Trump's rhetoric on immigration, particularly concerning H-1B visas crucial to the tech sector, and his approach to international trade, sparked deep divisions and often outright opposition from these corporate giants and their employees. But the rejection wasn't just about policy, it was personal. The people of Washington felt disrespected by the president's approach to issues like social justice and racial equality. Protests in Seattle and the growing divide over Trump's response to civil rights movements demonstrated that Washington residents were on the front lines of resisting his leadership. The state's political activism runs deep, and its residents have consistently made it clear they do not support a president who undermines the very issues they care about most, from environmental protection to tech innovation and social equity. Number 3 takes us to the islands of Hawaii. What does it look like when a state with profound connections to multiculturalism, a unique history, and a deep sense of environmental stewardship rejects Donald Trump? Hawaii stands out as a state that could hardly be more different from the former president's ideals. You'd be shocked by just how strongly Hawaii opposed Trump's policies throughout his presidency. The Aloha state has long been a Democratic stronghold, and its reaction to Trump was no surprise, yet the intensity was remarkable. Hawaii, which relies heavily on tourism, agriculture, and its diverse population, was quick to criticize Trump on numerous fronts. The state's economy was particularly vulnerable to his policies. Trump's trade wars, visa restrictions, and the alienation of international markets sent shockwaves through Hawaii's vital tourism industry. Furthermore, Hawaii's beautiful landscapes and diverse ecosystems are under threat from climate change effects, like rising sea levels and coastal erosion. Trump's rollback of environmental protections and his dismissive stance on climate science didn't sit well in a state that has spent years battling these very issues. Residents saw his disregard for climate science as a direct threat to their future. Hawaii is also a deeply military-connected state, with a significant U.S. military presence. While generally supportive of defense, Trump's erratic foreign policy, unpredictable stance on global alliances, and military interventions left many military families feeling uneasy. The rejection of Trump began even before the 2020 election, where the state voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. The opposition wasn't just from political elites or activists. It was widespread, cutting across demographic lines. Hawaii celebrates inclusivity and unity, the aloha spirit itself. Trump's divisive approach to race, immigration, and the economy simply didn't fit. The people rejected a president who couldn't unite the country, choosing instead to stand up for values of love, respect, and community. At number 2, we arrive in Maryland. What happens when a state with a rich history of political activism and a large, engaged government workforce decides it has had enough of Trump's policies? Maryland made it abundantly clear it wasn't having any of Trump's rhetoric or leadership. You'd be genuinely surprised to see how forcefully Marylanders reacted against his administration. From the dynamic streets of Baltimore to the affluent suburbs bordering Washington, D.C., Maryland's residents overwhelmingly rejected Trump's agenda. In the 2020 election, the state voted for Joe Biden with a whopping 65% of the vote, demonstrating a deep and broad opposition. Maryland is home to a large federal government workforce, and Trump's frequent attacks on federal employees and agencies did not sit well here. Many residents felt personally and professionally targeted by his administration's policies and rhetoric. From healthcare to climate change, Marylanders were furious over Trump's policy directions. The state has a strong tradition of supporting robust public services and environmental protection, putting it at odds with many of the administration's key initiatives. But Maryland's stance wasn't just about policy disagreements, it was about values. The state's diverse population and history of civil rights activism meant that Trump's often divisive language on race and immigration met significant resistance. Protests and community organizing were common throughout his term, reflecting a widespread rejection of his leadership style. Maryland quickly became one of the most staunchly anti-Trump states on the East Coast, with residents rallying against what they perceived as threats to their values and their livelihoods. The opposition was consistent, vocal, and reflected in the state's strong turnout for Democratic candidates. And finally, the #1 state on our list, Connecticut. What do you get when you combine a highly educated population, a deep sense of social responsibility, and proximity to the nation's political nerve center? You get Connecticut, perhaps the quintessential example of a state that took a firm stand against Donald Trump's presidency. With its strong Democratic base, the state was swift to oppose Trump's divisive tactics and policies. You'd be absolutely shocked at the near-unanimous rejection Trump faced here. In the 2020 election, Connecticut gave Joe Biden a decisive 20-point lead over Trump, showcasing the depth of the opposition. But Connecticut's resistance wasn't merely about party lines. The state places a high value on education, healthcare, and environmental protection, making Trump's policies in these areas a particularly tough sell. His administration's approach to science, healthcare reform, and environmental regulations clashed directly with the priorities of many Connecticut residents. The state's strong sense of community and social responsibility led to widespread rejection of Trump's leadership style, which was often perceived as abrasive and divisive. Residents reacted strongly to his attacks on established institutions and norms. Connecticut's proximity to New York City also meant that many residents were directly impacted by, or closely observed, the effects of Trump's policies on finance, immigration, and urban centers. The state's voters, known for their engagement and relatively high levels of education, scrutinized his administration closely and found it wanting. The rejection was broad, encompassing suburban moderates, urban Democrats, and even some disillusioned Republicans who could not align with Trump's brand of politics. Connecticut solidified its position as one of the most anti-Trump states in New England, reflecting a fundamental clash between its values and his presidency. So, there you have it. 10 states, each with its unique reasons, yet united in their significant opposition to Donald Trump's presidency. From the progressive powerhouses of the West Coast like California, Oregon, and Washington, to the East Coast strongholds of New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, and Connecticut, and even the surprisingly resistant states like Vermont and Illinois, the rejection was clear and often deeply personal. It wasn't just about policy disagreements on healthcare, climate change, or immigration. It was frequently rooted in a fundamental clash of values, a rejection of divisive rhetoric, and a defense of community principles. Whether driven by economic concerns, environmental consciousness, social justice advocacy, or intellectual pride, millions of Americans in these states made their voices heard loud and clear, demonstrating the deep political fissures that characterized the Trump era. This analysis reveals that the narrative of a uniformly supportive base overlooked the profound and passionate resistance brewing in significant parts of the nation. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember to subscribe, like, and comment below. We appreciate your viewership.